Recording.
Yes. We are live.
Ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Ms. Backman, can you hear us? Guess that's a no.
Monica, can you hear us?
I can, but I'm going to try to log in on my phone and log back in because the screen or the conference room on my end is frozen.
Okay.
But I can hear you just fine.
Can you hear me?
I can, Mayor.
All right, perfect. All right, so let's, I'm going to call the October 3rd Planning and Programming Committee meeting to order. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. At this point, we are going to approve the summary notes from the June 23rd, 2022 meeting. Is there a motion to approve the summary notes?
Move to approve.
All right, motion by Mayor Richel, seconded by somebody else.
Was I attending that virtually? Was that the one I was?
You were attendee. Yes, seconded by Chair Wheeler. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. We're now going to proceed to a status update on the transaction. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Jasper.
Thank you so much. Just doing a sound check for Mayor Rochelle. Is this okay?
Oh, fine. Thank you
Okay,
so much.
Well, thank you very much, Sri. You got the presentation up, good. So there's a presentation in your packet.
Hurry up, because I need to be on.
We wanted to bring you up to date on where we are with transaction because your next meeting, we will be coming back to you with a request for an endorsement. It'll almost certainly be with a different version of the draft plan to the one that has gone to, because we received public comments that merit us taking another look at the document. So that's what we plan to do. On the call tonight, we also have Tom Harrington, my consultant, who's going to spend a little time, not too much, discussing some modeling and scenario analysis results. But we do want to focus on giving you some updates related to public comments and some initial thoughts on where we think we're going with potential changes, not specific changes to the plan. And most of all, what we want is any feedback from you this evening, or to kind of, if we so many thoughts that in your minds that you want to take another look at and come back to us with any comments for enhancement to the plan. Yeah, that would be our main goal for this evening. And to be honest with you, even you asking us questions is a kind of feedback because you're really telling us there's something that you don't necessarily follow immediately. So, Sri, do you want to go to the next slide, slide 3? Not controllable. Okay, we seem to be having a bit of a technology issue with this presentation. I can continue since you all have the
We have a
packet. So on slide 3, the first 3 bullets are grayed out. These are things that have happened, they're in the past. And there are a couple of bullets ahead of us as we approach, hopefully, adoption of transaction in December. So the main thing we want to do, we've been doing this with other committees, is to basically review the feedback we've received and finalize the draft version of the plan and the project list. So slide 4 addresses public engagement. Sri, are you fixing the technical problems? I can go through this if you prefer.
It's so everyone can hear, everyone can see the presentation. It's just the room thumbnail is not doing good.
Oh, okay. Okay, so you can take over. You take over this.
I can, yeah.
Okay, so hand over to Sri. You have to talk loud for Mary Rochelle.
Sure. So we had the public comment period from August 1st to September 18th. And in between you were here for the public hearing on September 8th, just before the authority meeting. And for the public comment, we had an online comment form structured so that we can collect the comment in different ways about different parts of the plan. And then the plan, the draft summary itself was available online on our website. A project list that has 429 projects. That project list was on the website, both available in PDF format. The project list was also provided in a sortable format in the website, so people can sort it by jurisdiction, by location, mode, all these different ways. And there was also an interactive map provided that shows the various projects where they are located, and if people wanted to know about specific projects, and most probably people wanted to know projects that are close to their homes or where they work. The draft plan itself, as well as the comment form, were made available in 3 different languages: English, Spanish, and Korean, to make sure that we operationalize the equity core value to make sure people have access to all different languages. We had NVDA staff itself and your jurisdictional staff. You all as authority members and other committee members helped us spread the word through our own social media, newsletters, website, news media reports, things like that. We also had our team going out to 4 locations in different parts of the region, handing out postcards that had information about the plan and the links to where they can go see the documents and make the comments. So we tried all different ways to get people interested, read, comment on this plan. The total comments we received in the next slide, there are a total of 223 comments, most of them coming through the comment form, but though that comment form was the one we kind of pushed through so people can go and comment on, because it gives us a structured way of understanding the comments of different parts of the document. But there were also 6 letter responses directly sent to us, 2 emails. There was an option of voicemail, so one person at least used that option. And you heard from 21 people, about half of them coming in person and half of them joining us virtually to comment on the plan at the public hearing. As you can see, most of the comments came in English. There was 1 comment that came in Korean. So though we tried all different, gave the option to comment on different languages, mostly people commented in English itself. 205 unique commenters, which means if you compare that number with the 223 comments we received, there were certain people who commented multiple times, either through the same comment form or sending comment through the comment form and then coming here for a public hearing and giving a testimony. And the right side graph shows where they heard about us, about this opportunity. You can see it comes from various places. We had our own social media and other advertisements from NVTA side. And as I said, many of you all helped with that. There were several community or interest groups that pushed out about this opportunity too. This map shows kind of where the most of the comments came from. As you can see, a lot of comments came from inside the Beltway, the core area of the region, the densest area of the region, but it is spread out across the region. As you can see, there are 2. This is by zip code, by the way. So there are 2 zip codes where you see dark purple color. That's where if you look at this by zip code, that's where the most comments came from. The one on the southern part is obviously from Prince William County, near the Four Seasons community, where Van Buren Road extension is one of the projects in transaction. It was one of the projects in the 6-year program also, and we received many people commenting against the project in the 6-year program. They continued, that same team continued here too. We had a lot of project people commenting against that project. The other one is from City of Falls Church. Many people commented, and it's not specific to one project or the other. They were in general supportive of all the transit and bikeway projects, especially in the city and the surrounding areas, but also about various other projects or the comments about roadway projects, transit projects, bike pedestrian projects. There were a few comments less in single digits from other places like DC, Maryland, and other Virginia counties outside Northern Virginia. There was one comment from New York City. I don't know how that comment came from or that person is interested, but we saw that by zip code. Now there is a possibility that the person typed the wrong zip code, but still we received one from New York City. Here are some major takeaway for you, some common themes we heard about in the comments. There were a lot of comments that were against new roadway building or widening of existing roadway. People were concerned about how those projects can affect the vehicle miles traveled, VMT, and if the roads will increase VMT, if that increases, then it will affect the emissions, and it might add for induced demand. These were the kind of themes we heard about the comments why people spoke against roadway projects. As I said, there were environmental concerns, safety concerns about if you have more roads, more driving might happen, and that will lead to more safety issues. And there were several comments about transit and bike, but especially supportive of all the NVTA projects, NVTA process to push for transit. As you remember, we had BRT network as a major theme to be identified, and NVTA staff worked with jurisdiction agency staff. So that we received a lot of support for that project, that BRT idea. So this again, looking at different ways. The first chart on the left shows which by mode how many comments we received. As I mentioned, there were a lot of comments about roadways. So obviously, roadway is a mode that we heard most. But transit and bike could also, we had a lot about, and mostly positive comments. On the right side, you see, again, roadway is bad. That's one of the major themes we heard. So a lot of comments were negative. We have asked specifically about the transaction goals and core values. We heard whether the plan achieved transaction goals. And many people disagreed or strongly disagreed, more than 50% together. And you can see some of the sample comments. But I'll hand over to Keith to talk through. Keith, are you taking it here or the 2 slides?
You can keep going, you're doing a great job.
Okay, thank you. So I'll continue with 2 more. So yeah, as you can see, slightly more than 50% commented they didn't agree or they strongly disagree that the plan didn't achieve the goal or wouldn't achieve the goals. Some of the comments, as you can see, covered about more roadways, and then we have positive comments too. So the BRT plan that we proposed was something that everyone accepted or everyone is agreeing as a good idea. The bike projects along Berg VRE Trail, that is another supportive. We had support about that project. As I said again, we asked about whether the plan reflects the core values of safety, equity, and sustainability. Again, we heard many people saying no, disagree or strongly disagree. Again, go back to that same concept of if you are increasing or if you are adding more roadways, that will not be safe, that will not be sustainable. That's the kind of themes we kept hearing. I'm sure at this point I'll hand it over to.
Okay, thanks. Before I talk about scenario analysis, let me just kind of point out one metric that Sri gave you a few slides back of 223 comments received. Just for reference, when we went through this process 5 years ago, we got in excess of 600 comments, right, Sri?
Yes.
So we're only getting about a third of the comments this time that we got last time, and you know, internally and with your staff as well, we brainstormed a little bit about why that may be the case. We think there are a number of reasons why that may be the case, not the least of which is, you know, we did this over, you know, during August and September. So maybe some people were just kind of offline over that time period and didn't tune in. We think it may have a lot to do with the fact that there have been a lot of public comment periods over the course of this year on various transportation matters, you know, including our own on the 6-year program. And maybe people are maxed out or maybe even confused as to what they're commenting on or what they've already commented on that. So we're not exactly sure. It could also be, you know, 5 years down the road. Keeping in mind the current transaction that was adopted 5 years ago was the first version of transaction to be adopted after HB 2313 when MBTA got its revenue stream. So there may have been a much higher level of interest at that point, and people feel that MBTA is a bit more mainstreamed and it's a long-range plan and whatever. We don't have any hard data. We can just hypothesize on possible reasons. So I just wanted to give you that context. As far as scenario analysis is concerned.
Can I ask a question on this?
Sure.
So 5 years ago, was there a particular distribution of the comments? Like, was there one or two particularly controversial projects that were driving most of those comments versus what we're dealing with this year?
To be honest, I have to go back and check. It's a good question. I think a lot of the comments were more process related last time. We do have comments on a number of specific projects or project types this year.
Sure.
We did get something similar to that last time. Again, the volume, you know, is not that high, and certainly compared to our 6-year program where there's funding at stake, the volume of comments on projects, because all the comments pretty much are on projects under the 6-year program, is way higher than we see long range plans. So, you know, we'd have to check. I'd also note that you may have noticed it on the graphic that's in the packet where we showed the map, the zip codes. Sri mentioned New York, which we didn't show on the map. But you know, the bulk of the comments are from kind of like the central and inner jurisdictions. There's not a whole lot of comments in total, really, that are coming from the outer jurisdictions, with the exception of one zip code related to a specific project, for the most part, it's William County. With the geographic distribution, we'll go back and look at that. I would say we've been a lot more sophisticated this time with how we've done this. I mean, we've actually had targeted promotional adverts on Facebook to try and reach equity emphasis areas. I'd have to say the consultant team and our in-house communications team have worked their socks off to get the message out. I don't think any more could have been done on our side, including going to 3 languages this time for the first time. I don't think we could have done any more on our side, but for whatever reason, people just didn't seem as engaged with transaction this time as they were 5 years ago. Scenario analysis is one of the more complex analytical components of transaction, and without doubt the most difficult to communicate in a simple but comprehensive manner. And just as a very quick recap, we do scenario analysis in transaction because this is our technique for trying to determine uncertainty in long-range transportation planning. We have what we call the standard forecast, which is built around the COG model, which looks out to 2045, and then we look at scenarios. We chose 3 scenarios where we look at alternative views of the future to see how the analysis changes with those different scenarios. So it gives us an idea as to the robustness of the standard forecasts, and it gives us an idea potentially of whether the projects perform well under all scenarios or just a handful of scenarios and what the differences might be. So the scenarios we looked at were our version of the new normal with reduced trip making that, happened during the pandemic, but at a lesser scale. Our assumptions were it will continue into the future. And so that obviously has an impact on trip making behaviors in the future. We looked at the impact of potential impact of technology, covering a whole range of things from connected automated vehicles, shared and electric vehicles. And we looked, so both of those things, new normal and technology, are things which are largely out of our hands, out of your hands. These are things which, for which market forces will ultimately determine what happens in the future. The third scenario was about incentives and pricing, which was a policy-based approach to look at changing travel behavior, which really could not happen without a fairly extensive level of government action at multiple layers of government in the region. But these were the three scenarios we looked at. To continue in the draft plan document, when it comes to communicating the scenarios, we could have done, we could have been clearer. I think, for example, the definitions of two of the three scenarios listed on page 20 of the draft plan should have mentioned that they also included some of the assumptions associated with the third scenario that we looked at. And while in the plan it doesn't actually change the numbers, it doesn't help when we try and simplify things if some things aren't stated, because it affects the way people understand scenario analysis. So we're taking a big look at that, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. So on this slide, there is a sense among people who express an opinion on scenarios through the online comment form that it's both positive, negative, and in some cases neither of those two things. There weren't, as a percentage, there weren't a lot of people who were commenting on the scenario analysis, which may itself be a reflection of it being not communicated as well as it could be, what it all actually meant. There are some example comments in the bottom half of this slide, which on the one hand was kind of complimentary in the sense that we were looking at different versions of the future and the need to do that. There may have been different opinions about how we formed our assumptions. And there was also the sense that, particularly with the incentives and pricing, while that might be an effective way to alter travel behavior, if it's going to happen, MBTA needs to support such a policy with appropriate infrastructure to give people a real choice. Otherwise, it may not result in anything much other than what this commenter said was more taxation on poor people. So all reasonable comments there as far as scenario analysis is concerned. On the next slide, we look at feedback on some specific projects. I'm not sure how many we've got on this page. It looks like there's about 20 projects we've listed here out of the 429. That's not to say there weren't comments on other projects, but these were the projects that were most commented upon. And at the top of the list is that a project in Prince William County, for which there was quite a lot of comment during the 6-year program as well. So a lot of mentions there, and they were all negative with respect to that project. And below that, the level of commenting was at about a third the level of that Prince William County project. And for the most part, the comments that were received were positive to the projects that were mentioned. I will note for benefit of Councilmember Snyder, there's a lot of the comments on these projects are related to projects in the City of Falls Church. And so there may well have been an organised response, but there may well have been organised responses on a lot of comments. That doesn't really matter in our process. The comments are comment. On the next slide, actually, I think is the last slide. Before we go on to modeling, I just wanted to mention here what we're looking at in terms of potential enhancements to the documents based on both comments that we've received and observations that we've made of ourselves during the course and subsequent to the public comment period. With respect to the project list first, rather than the plan, there's a couple of minor things we need to look at, nothing which will require any reanalysis. But in a list of 429 projects, I guess it was always inevitable that there would be some duplication. And indeed, there appears to be a couple of projects which have got slightly different titles and slightly different descriptions, which nonetheless look like they're the same project. So we're exploring with the localities concerned specifics of that, so with a view to potentially removing the duplicates from the list. Inevitably, with the timing of these things, that it looks like there are a couple of projects along the way which were legitimately included in the project list at the time we were putting the project list together, but in reality now they're either fully funded or under construction, in which case they shouldn't be on the project list because that essentially disqualifies them from being on the project list if they're under construction or fully funded. So that'll be just a question. They are included in the analysis, and the consultant has looked at the impact of removing these projects from the project list, and it doesn't seem to be any sort of big deal to do that. Very, very kind of almost administrative. We have a part of the project list which talks about the project sponsor. In one case, the project sponsor was misstated, and that would be corrected. And in some cases, a handful of cases, the actual physical location of the project was incorrect. The project was described correctly and modeled correctly, but in the project list, I think it was like one of the old problems between Fairfax and Alexandria was as part of Alexandria, the in Fairfax, and that kind of confusion, I think, was maybe accounted.
There's no part of Alexandria in Fairfax. Parts of Fairfax that call themselves Alexandria.
Fair enough. Anyway, we will attempt to clarify that in the final version of the plan. As Sri mentioned, we have an interactive map. We want to make sure the interactive map is accurate. We did find one project where the terminal point was misplaced. We'll correct that. And then, so that's kind of on the project side. More substantively on the plan itself, chapters 6, 7, and 8 in the plan are the ones we in particular taking a look at. These are respectively section 6, what are the impacts of the plan? Section 7, what happens if the future is different than expected? That's the uncertainty scenario analysis part of the plan. And section 8 is the concluding section, how will transaction benefit the region? And we are looking, based on a number of comments we've received to better explain, provide more clear explanations of what the analysis was, what scenario analysis means, perhaps more so than how we did it. What's important is what we concluded, and I think it may be a little bit muddled between the two at the moment. So we're looking to see whether we can talk more about what scenario analysis means rather than drawing people into the weeds of how we did it, how we did the analysis. And in section 8, we want to make sure that the plan document finishes with a very clear statement of some fairly key points, which is one that recur. Actually, I remember this coming up a lot 5 years ago. Transaction is not a funding document. There's nothing in transaction which commits you the authority for funding a single project in transaction. Indeed, there are a number of projects you could not legally fund anyway because they're not in Northern Virginia. For some of those projects, you may be able to partially fund those if there's an acceptable funding agreement with the non-NOVA jurisdictions of those projects. But for the most part, we would say you can't fund projects outside of Northern Virginia anyway. So the point is that none of the 429 projects has any sort of funding commitment if this or some subsequent version of the plan document is adopted by the authority. Another couple of things that we frequently mention, and perhaps we we're guilty of using jargon here without really explaining it. A transaction intentionally includes projects, more projects than can be funded. We've used the figure, our planning estimate is for the projects is $75 billion. No one's ever pretended for a moment that $75 billion can be afforded over the course of the next 20 to 25 years. The point being the projects that are included because they address the needs that have been identified to improve mobility for Northern Virginians, particularly with a view on congestion reduction, although not exclusively. So this is what we call geographically unconstrained. We sometimes use geographic unconstrained without really explaining what it means. It basically means the projects are included not on the basis of where they are or whether they can be afforded. They're included on the basis of they support transportation needs. The other thing closely related to that is fiscally unconstrained, which is really where the funding side of things come in. It's 75 billion because that's the planning estimate for the projects. It's not 75 billion because 75 billion is a reasonable target to spend on these projects. Projects are included without reference to their ability to be funded. So that's really where the fiscally unconstrained part of this comes out. I don't know how well we did in explaining that. It still seems to attract comment, and so we'll take another look and see whether we can improve that. And that really applies to everything in 6, 7, and 8. Stepping back a little bit further, we're going to look again at the entire document to make sure the content that's in the entire document is communicated effectively and accurately. And we also, I don't want to sound cosmetic here, but we do want to try and beautify the document, which is in its current form is intentionally draft, intentionally basic, because we didn't want to invest a lot of money in a draft document we knew was going to change in terms of the graphical appeal of the document. We do want to begin to think about making it a more pleasing document to look at as we go through this finalization process as well. So that's really where we are right now on the changes that we're contemplating, and we're still working through the comments. Just by no means a complete exercise, it's just where we are at this moment. For the authority meeting that's coming up in October, we want to give you a fuller update on what we're thinking. But as this committee is the final one for endorsements prior to authority action, we wanted to give you a kind of a head start on what we're thinking about. So in October, when we come to the full authority, we'll give a more in-depth description of what the public comments are telling us, and a more in-depth summary of what we're proposing to change. And then, with any additional comments we receive from you tonight, or subsequent to this meeting, or from the authority as a whole in October, we'll take all that on board with our own analysis, and we'll turn around the document so that when you reconvene in November, and the same is true for the 2 statutory committees, when they reconvene in November, we'll have a final draft for your consideration for endorsement, and then subsequently adoption by the authority in December. Let me take a pause there, because if there's anything you want to give us feedback on right now, this evening, while it's fresh, now will be a great time.
Well, I think it's very comprehensive what you presented to us so far. I think when thinking about the 1/3 response, you said it was 1/3 of what it was some years ago. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes.
Whenever responses drop, it makes me think that maybe people are satisfied, and because upset people tend to respond more than people who are not upset. So maybe that has something to do with it. And it's not really a demographically accurate, it's not polling data. It's just, give me your impressions, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, no, that's a reasonable hypothesis.
Yeah.
With the other ones I mentioned. So yeah, we can add that to the list for sure. And if the public are generally not responding because they're not concerned, then so be it.
They're satisfied. Thank you.
Other comments? Chair Willie?
No, I will say that I was just thinking, I was at a presentation of regional concerns, and it was a broad open regional concern. What's the biggest thing facing our region recently? And there was transportation. And after that was inflation, and I forget what was the third, maybe both worse. But it was a very scientific survey. You know, it went out and sampled many different populations and didn't, you know, and I just sometimes realize, you know, when we do get these comments back and everything else, they're self-selected and they are coordinated. And it doesn't mean that they aren't important, but they're not scientific necessarily. And I think that's just sort of important to recognize versus because the further survey, the scientific survey talked about one of the options, why should we build no roads to make people use transit, force people to use transit? And like 80% of the people disagreed with that statement. You know, I mean, that wasn't a good strategy for getting people to use public transit, just making their lives unbearable on roads. And so, you know, there's so many different perspectives out there. And like you were saying, I mean, we may not have gotten as many comments back because people are satisfied with some of the things that have happened over the last 5 or 6 years. And so they're paying less attention. I'll just sort of throw that out.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't place too much stock in kind of the volume of input versus previous years or not necessarily. I think for me, it's focusing on the themes that emerge from the input, and certainly, you know, some of these are themes. You know, you kind of put aside the folks who have specific concerns about you know, specific projects that are adjacent to them or whatever. When you kind of put aside that, not to diminish that input, but just to recognize where it's coming from. I think some of the broader thematic input is input I think we've grappled with as a committee and as a committee as well as the board as a whole. And I think it's going to be a continued struggle for us as we move forward. I think Chair Wheeler's right that there is a tension between you know, this desire to and this imperative that we make transition around how the region moves and the impact of how the region moves, but also a recognition that that's going to have to happen over time. I think the debate is around how quickly and how severe we have to make that transition, and you know, there's considerable debate on that, and I think you see different approaches in the region around that. But yeah, I think you see that in the comments for sure. Sir?
A couple things. For decades, Virginia had underfunded transportation, and that created a significant backlog, particularly roadway projects. And I think the region got the funding and has done a very good job of addressing that backlog. Now, there's still more to do. But are we to the point where enough of that's been done? Keep looking for like safety hotspots or places where there's regular flooding when there's rain or other things like that on the roadway system that we should continue to focus on, and improvements and widening where justified. But are we to the point where that backlog has at least in part been addressed and we should begin to pivot as a region? What else really needs our attention to achieve our larger objectives? So that would be the question for this 5-year plan. How do we continue to address the roadway issues, but recognize that basically the question is, how are we going to define success in 5 years from now? I would argue that the last 5 years have shown a remarkable degree of success, and if you will, have given back to the public exactly what they expected and wanted and deserved when they convinced the legislature to begin to address that backlog. And by pivot, I mean technology pivot. For example, just throwing out some potential measures of success. In 5 years from now, will this region really be covered with electric charging stations needed to move our vehicle fleet to where everyone says it needs to go? And a little bit responding to the comment, the big picture issues. In other words, we need to keep doing what we've been doing, but where now do we want to be 5 years from now, and how do we want to achieve that? I don't want to make that so out there that it's just like, yeah, fine. But one measure might be, is the region truly electric vehicle supportive? Does that mean we have charging stations everywhere they need to be throughout the region? Does it really move people more effectively on the transit system? Are the bus systems better coordinated? Have we fixed the issues with Metro? Biking has really taken off as a mode share. And so it seems to me there's a lot of backlog with biking infrastructure and pedestrian infrastructure. I mean, just for example, an international example. So after being in Poland working with the Ukraine refugees, we stopped off, nice to be able to do. We stopped off in Paris, which has gone from very car to bikes everywhere. And I'm not saying that that's a good model or one that we should follow. And I recognize we have a very broad and diverse region. But I think in some ways we ought to say, yeah, we have in partly achieved what the legislature wanted us to achieve with the funding and with our planning and allocation of resources. Now is a time to look at things again, to say, yeah, we need to keep working on the roadways, but should we sort of overlay it with a real strategy? Where do we want to be in 5 years?
There's a lot there. If I may respond as best I can. Many of the things you talk about there are policy related. I can only give you a transportation planner's perspective. I think the authority with its investments since starting in fiscal year 2014 definitely has made a difference. I mean, it's like $3.1 billion has been invested, most of which may not have been invested had it not been for the creation and funding of MBTA. So yes, definitely it's had an impact. And when you look at what that money's been invested in, sure, probably the largest single category is new or widened roadways or new or improved intersections and interchanges. But that's not to say there hasn't been also a huge amount of investment, including in the very first program, the fiscal year 2014 program, in new metro rail stations, in power attraction upgrades, park and ride, bus acquisitions, access to transit improvements for pedestrians and so on. And that was just in FY14. It's continued and grown ever since that. To the extent that the largest project the authority to this day has invested in is a BRT project. The single largest amount of funding for one project is for the Richmond Highway BRT project in Fairfax County. But now MBTA is funded to different extents in 5 different BRT projects. So one of the first things I would kind of say, looking at my crystal ball going forwards, is there's an understandable desire to extend metro rail throughout the region, because it's like trunk rail all day service, is the backbone for most big cities. You mentioned Paris, and for sure it's the case in Paris. But in our region right now, it's important to continue planning in the long term for metro rail extensions, but we know none of those metro rail extensions are going to come, even if the money is available, without addressing core capacity issues in Washington, DC and in the immediate surroundings of Washington, DC on the Virginia side. And that's in the plan too. Although I would note that some of that it cannot be funded exclusively, potentially at all by MBTA. But so while looking in the long term to metro rail extensions and recognizing from our very own surveys that people want choices to driving alone. And we need to give people choices in order to reduce the dependency on driving alone. But the way I think as a planner I look at it is it's more about what you can provide extra to Northern Virginia rather than what you should take away in order to force an outcome, which ultimately is going to depend on individual circumstances, whether or not people want to do it. I mean, pricing and incentives is a great thing from a transportation planning perspective. It's got enormous implications from a transportation policy perspective. It could happen. It could have a great outcome. And indeed, our analysis shows that it probably would in terms of meeting MBTA's congestion reduction goals and so on. So I think we are, I don't want to overuse the word pivotal moment in time, but we are certainly at a point in time when it makes sense to reflect on what's been done and reflect on what you, the authority, want to see happen over the next 5, 10, 20 years or more. My thought is when you look at the amount of funding requests that we get in each update for the 6-year program, we've kind of settled around now at about twice as much in funding requests than is available. So there certainly seems to be demand to do more across all modes. So I don't think the region has reached the point where it can stop investing in one mode and move to another. I mean, you're not suggesting that anyway.
I'm not saying that.
You're not saying that anyway. So, but I do think the other thing that's really, really important to keep in mind is that we don't want to kind of shrink wrap the region and let it be the way it is today forevermore. I don't think any of your economic development people will want that. And indeed, our modeling is all based on the fact that, the COG through the cooperative forecasting process takes on board all of the planning assumptions we're making for the future. And, we see a 23% increase in population between now and 2045, and a 33% increase in employment between now and 2045. So the way I look at it, it's a bit like schools. You don't stop building schools in an environment where the population is growing, and you can't really stop investing in transportation under the same sorts of scenarios. If the region's growing, which I think economically everyone wants it to do, then part of that growth is going to be in the transportation network. Now, we are in a situation with the price of land, the price of housing. A lot of people are traveling long distances for trips, particularly commute trips, because they can't afford to live closer to work than the flight to live. And so, a lot of the issues that the region faces kind of manifest themselves in transportation issues, but the solutions may or may not be transportation. And as you all know, as we've repeatedly said, MBTA does not do land use, but there is no doubt that land use and transportation and housing affordability are very, very closely connected. So transportation is a piece of that, but perhaps the bigger piece is land use. And we address land use in that the 2045 forecast that we're using are based on COG's forecast for 2045, which in turn are based on your forecast for your respective jurisdictions in 2045. And so, that's showing us that growth is coming, and if growth's coming, the region needs to continue to adapt and evolve to address that. I'm sure I haven't answered all of the points that you raised, but kind of off the top of my head, that's what I think. You mentioned also technology and EV chargers and so on. I mean, I think it's it's great and it's essential that happens from a personal planning perspective. And that probably is the one big thing we're going to see that's different compared to looking about 5 years into the past. Looking 5 years into the future, there has to be rapid investment in EV infrastructure, not just chargers. I mean, it's like the vehicles that people own and drive, or lease and drive, or share and drive, or ride in. The vehicles, the charging, the electrical system infrastructure that delivers the power to the chargers needs to be looked at, which in turn begs the question, well, what's generating the power in the first place? So that needs to be looked at as well. But in terms of meeting other policy goals, and that clearly is one big thing that's got to change. And potentially the other thing which needs to change, although I'm struggling in the short term to see how, is travel behavior to the extent that we have a more efficient transportation system, which basically looks at, from our point of view, person miles traveled in relation to vehicle miles traveled. You want that ratio to be as high as possible, so you get as many people traveling with as few vehicles traveling as possible. So you can achieve that by basically sharing vehicles, be that cars, shuttles, buses, trains, whatever. But it's how you make that happen is dependent on so many things, some of which MBTA has influence over, some of which it most certainly doesn't.
So, and I'm going to go to Mayor Rochelle here in a second, but let me just say that I really appreciate certainly your comments around housing policy. I think housing policy is the most important transportation policy we can make. But I do want to say that I think it shows in the results here of the scenarios and kind of how you projected these, that there is considerably an interplay between investments we make and the impact of other investments on VMT, on PMT, on overall congestion. And so if you make one investment, it will at times make another investment less effective or more effective, depending on how you do it. And so I think we just have to recognize that sometimes we have competing investments across the region, and that is a factor in how this all results, and is certainly a factor in how quickly we can achieve some of the larger objectives we have around greenhouse gas emissions, around efficiency of the transportation network, and things like that. And so certainly housing policy is a big part of that, and I'm not minimizing that at all. It's something we talk about a great deal, but we also have to recognize our investments alone, taken with some of the other investments that are occurring funded elsewhere, do have a factor on each other. They affect each other. They don't stand alone.
No, I totally agree with that. One thing I failed to mention is there's a couple of pages in the draft plan which are devoted to something that Ms. Batman's mentioned a few times now, and that is bus rapid transit. It's covered on pages 13 and 14 in the plan. We're not advocating for a BRT system, but what we're saying is we have this gap between metro rail extensions a long way into the future. I mean, we're measuring that in terms of decades versus now, where people, in many cases, basically have no choice but to drive alone. We see, because MBTA is already investing in bus rapid transit, individual lines, there's a huge synergistic potential to actually start thinking about BRT as a system rather than a series of lines. The city has 3 of these.
Yeah.
And so that's why we have the conversation or the discussion in the plan on BRT. That's not easy either. To do it as a system as opposed to a series of lines does imply a fair amount of regional planning is required, and that as why Ms. Backman's mentioned several times, that she'd like to pursue that further. I'm going to speak for her since she's on the line anyway. But that's something I think she wants to bring up separately with respect to looking at the long term, but also not so far as the long term, but certainly within that 5-year time frame. The Councilmember Snyder referred to a regional BRT system could begin to take shape, depending on decisions that the authority makes.
Okay, I'm going to get Mayor Michelle.
I acknowledge there's so many different opinions and vigorous discussion that goes on. But I just wanted to throw out there the thought that you talked about backlog. And I just want to throw out there that we may always have a backlog. It depends on how the region grows, the nature of the region, who comes, who leaves, who stays. I foresee always having a backlog. For example, Manassas Park has a lot of blue-collar workers. They cannot afford to live, as you pointed out, Chief, not everyone can afford the housing in all locations. So, we're projected to have, I don't recall the time period, but over the next few years, 600,000 new people in the region. That's going to change the character of our decision making, possibly. People want to live here. This is a very attractive region to live in. There are other areas of the United States where people are leaving. It's becoming less and less attractive for people to stay, but we're attractive. This is a place that businesses want to come. It's a place where professionals want to come and live and raise their family. So I just foresee us always having a backlog. Thank you.
I keep trying to get past this transit versus roadway thing, which I guess I've been around long enough and I'm really tired of it, because the answer is that it's both, but it's much more complicated. It's much more nuanced than that. I guess the basic question now is, what priorities will best achieve the 3 goals that we've set for ourselves? Safety, equity, and sustainability. And can't we begin to act as a region as opposed to an assemblage of particular projects put forward? And does this offer the opportunity to do some serious thinking? Yes, we're going to have more people here. Yes, we need to keep investing in our roadway system because that's the way most people get around. But what can we do to make the roadways more sustainable, more safe, better serve equity? What can we do to our transit systems? What can we do with the fact that more and more people want to bike and walk and are replacing those types of trips? They're doing those types of trips where they can versus using the car to make the same trip. And then what do we do to make the car system, the roadway system, more sustainable? And one way would be to truly make the region supportive of electric vehicles or whatever, and then technology. How do we adopt technology to make our roadway system more efficient for everybody? Everything from signal optimization, which has been talked about for decades, and as far as I can tell, still hasn't been done. This is the question I'm asking. How are we going to define success? In a way, I think we've achieved a remarkable degree of success over the last 5-year plan. But partly it was a lot of focus on roadways, and that was entirely justified. Now the question is, the next 5 years, where do we put our money to best achieve the 3 objectives that we set forth? And shouldn't we be thinking about that as a region?
No, you're absolutely right. What transaction does is it gives you options. What MBTA invests in will be dealt with through the 6-year program process, and essentially, member jurisdictions and our regional agency partners decide which projects to put forward for funding. we go through a process to evaluate all those projects. Which obviously has to pay regard to the relevant sections of the Code of Virginia. But in terms of the priorities for investment, that really kind of comes from the jurisdictions as to what projects you want to seek investment for. Transaction doesn't attempt to tell you that.
And Keith, this is Monica, if I could chime in. Mrs. Snyder, that's a great question. And I think looking beyond, because like you said, it's not about transit versus roadways. It's about modal options. It's about getting people out of their SOVs. It's about making transit as attractive to an SOV so that people want to take transit. It's about reducing commuting times and travel times. And how does that look? And I think how it looks really depends on where we are in the region or where someone is in the region. We don't work in silos, as you all know. So what can we do as a transportation authority to try to alleviate some of those things that are in alignment with our core values? The TPB's regional household travel survey results, we look at those, we look at the state of commute results, but how do we make sure the investments are equitable for everyone in the region? And how do we make sure we're incentivizing people to get out of their SOVs? Now, in transaction, we do have electric charging stations throughout the region. We want to make sure we're in a position to fund that. In your most recent funding program that you funded in July, we funded some electric buses, but we want to go further. And going further really depends, in my opinion, on where we are in the region. And then you have to compile the population increase, the employment increase. So I do agree that we're always going to be in a state of catching up because we do have people moving in, employers moving in, which is a great thing. So we're trying to stay on par to the extent possible with those increases, but at the same time, trying to incentivize. So we have the Transportation Technology Strategic Plan, which we've rolled a lot of that into transaction, working with the Commonwealth on the regional multimodal mobility program, this regional BRT network that we're trying to advance that I spoke to you at your September meeting about. And how does all of that look? And if I had to put it in one sentence, is making sure we're in a position to give people options so that we can reduce the dependency on SOVs. Again, the great thing about MBTA, we have been fortunate enough that we can fund WOND trails, bike ped facilities, things of that nature, Metro, VRE, BRT. It's going to be very difficult, unless you identify air travel, to identify a mode in this region that we're not investing in. Now, how those investments come to fruition, as Keith noted, of course, and you won't know, transaction isn't the funding document. We look at the 6-year program and the call for projects. But for us, we also have to be mindful of long-term benefits. And that's why I said every locality may not be on pace to do what their neighboring locality is. But from a commuter's perspective, you want the system to be as seamless as possible. You don't want to have different fees or run into congestion depending on where you are in the region. And I think that's what we're trying to do. And if someone asks me 5 years from now where we would like to be, is having more people out of their single SOVs. And I'm not going to put a number on it, but creating more modal options for all and making sure we're incentivizing.
But, I think I'm going to Chair Wheeler here in a second, but I think Councilmember Snyder makes a good point. I think it's a challenge of the way we do this, the way we fund things, where I think right now, if I said I want to bake a cake and I asked all of you to bring ingredients, but I didn't tell you exactly which ingredients to bring, you might show up with eggs, he might bring salsa, and we're ultimately going to have to figure out how to bake the cake, right? So what we've not done, and I think to Councilmember Snyder's point, if you want it to be a cohesive system, you would have to say,
this year, we are going to build a BRT system between Prince William County and Fairfax and Loudoun. And y'all are going to have to propose as part of your projects, you know, a BRT system. We don't provide that kind of, that level of direction from the MBTA, because I think we recognize that we are one sliver of overall investment, that there's other pieces that you're using local money, you're using state money, you're using a variety of other developer contributions, whatever. But then I think we've not said, and I think Councilor Snyder brings up a good point, you know, we've not said, you know, hey, in this plan, we are going to, let's say, you know, reduce VMT, you know, I'm just picking one, but like, you know, where we are going to, you know, reduce, increase transit person trips or whatever. If we said that, we would have to be a lot more prescriptive about how the projects come to us, rather than just assembling a group of projects that have come in, dealing with relative benefit across the jurisdictions, still ranking them based on the criteria we've come up with, but again, not trying to get to an overall cake, you know, and I think that's a challenge in the way we do this process. And, you know, perhaps that's something we could do differently in the future, but it's a radical departure from where we're at. So.
And I would just say that, I mean, three things. One, success looks different in each jurisdiction, right? What might be success in Prince William County is, you know, I've often said that for the jurisdictions that don't have as much transit, you should focus the EV push in the outer regions if you really want to do that, because other people, you know, those are the ones using the most cars. So we should focus on that. And at the same time, it might be more commuter bus, long commuter bus, you know, going up and down 66 or 95. And how can we, you know, look at our transit from that? You know, so those are two ways of measuring success for Prince William County. But the thing I do come across with EVs, and there are many ways to fund the EV infrastructure. I mean, we're back to, you know, we're about congestion relief. And electric vehicles don't have anything to do in a lot of ways with congestion relief. Now, we all want them, but it's not necessarily something that, you know, fits into our mission per se. But that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be important, and we are already focusing on them. So, but I do think they're more important to the outer jurisdictions, and as are perhaps commuter buses, as opposed to things, I mean, you know, what you need to the inner jurisdictions. It's just one size doesn't fit all, but that doesn't mean that we can't have, maybe we need to figure out what success looks like in each region. Sure. and measure that.
Sometimes, well, not sometimes, I would say most of the time, the benefit to a particular locality is based upon need. I mean, each one of us who come here are responsible to our constituents and what our constituents need. So if we put forward a project, it's probably based on need, and it's based on requests from constituents or some quantifiable data that shows the need.
Other comments?
We are well over the hour mark. There are a number of slides in the presentation pack related to modeling results and scenario analysis. They're quite technical in nature. Tom Harrington's on the line. We're happy to go through them. But if you don't want us to do that, then I guess that would be fine too, since you have them in the packet. I would say that your staff have had the benefit of a briefing on these detailed technical slides, so they are in the loop on this. So, Chairman, I'll leave it to you as to whether if we go through them, we're probably going to be within 20 to 30 minutes.
Yeah, I got it. So what are the druthers around the room here? Are there specific questions that folks have around how these scenarios were arrived at?
I had a question about the overall results.
I said, are there specific questions around how the scenarios were arrived at? And Councilmember Snyder said he had a specific question around the overall results.
At what page?
This one,
Page 33.
I don't see a
I
number.
don't see a number in there.
There's numbers in the bottom left. Please come on.
Some of them,
Yes,
some of them have
No,
numbers.
you don't have numbers.
17, 18 maybe? Are you looking at 18 or are you looking
What's the
at?
title?
Change in 2025.
It's a map.
This one.
Yeah.
Oh,
Gray map.
Double map one.
Yeah.
Okay,
18. Looks like it's on page 18.
got it. 18.
Right
18.
after 17.
So I suspect that a lot of folks will be looking at this. So tell me what the difference is between build versus no build. Is building everything in all the projects versus no build?
Right.
I'm trying to figure out how we get to, I think that the hours of delay, most people would look at that and say that's a pretty good measure of success.
Right. So the build, when we start with a no build, the no build network, which is obviously a bit too much of a jargony name because it isn't obvious straight away what it means, but essentially a no build is what the transportation system will look like, taking account of what's there today, what's being constructed today or at some point in the future, and we know it's going to be constructed because it's got funding, or what's got funding, fully funded, but not yet got to the point that it's starting construction. So basically anything that's there, on the way, or definitely going to happen because it's got funding, that is the no build network. Okay. The build network takes the no build network, and on top of that has the 429 projects in the project list, all of them. So that is the difference between the build and the no build. I hope that is clear, and if it's not, I need to know, because that means we've got some work to do in clarifying that in the document.
So the bill, just so I understand, the bill is how many billions of dollars? It's every project in the plan.
That's the 429 projects, $75 billion. Yeah.
Correct. So $75 billion, and these projects will get you this map. Is that the way to understand it? The way that,
yeah.
you know.
That's the way to interpret it, yeah.
Okay.
And these maps are looking at 2045. So they're taking into account trip behavior, trip patterns in 2045. So that builds in the extra growth that I mentioned earlier, the 23% population growth and the 33% increase in jobs is what's built into those 2045 maps as well.
Okay, it's really helpful to understand what the build option scenario is and what the no build. The no build is actually not no build, it's everything in planning effectively that's actually going to happen.
Yes.
Plus what's there today.
Yes. Yeah. And in the MBTA world, the only projects that would be eligible for future funding are those that are in the build network, the 429 projects, because our assumption is that if a project is in the no build network, it has to be fully funded. And if it's fully funded, we would not entertain a request for funding for a project that is fully funded.
So we have a map that shows literally no build versus the, I don't know how to phrase this right, literally says we have exactly what we have today that's on the ground. And what benefits do we get from all those projects that we're talking about now that are really going to happen? You see what I mean?
So you want to see a scenario of we stop doing anything right now. We just don't do anything, even in-flight funded projects. Then you want to see let's complete everything that's in flight that's funded, but nothing new. And then this is obviously everything in flight plus what was proposed. So there's a literal no build scenario that you want with the in-flight. So it's probably more of a nomenclature issue around how do we refer to these.
Yeah. Tom Harrington's on the call. He can by all means unmute himself and explain this better than I probably can.
I think you explained it fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
The thing I would say is we don't have something that's kind of splits the difference between, absolutely what's here today and nothing else versus what's here today plus the things that are committed.
Like
or under
on deck
construction.
plans as opposed to saying no build is no build. You mean like things that are already, they're planned for?
Yeah, I mean, this is where no build gets a little bit confusing because it does actually include the building of things that are fully committed in terms of funding. So, but in the way we prefer to this, because we've got a build, then the thing we're comparing against is the no build. But the no build does include a little bit of building, but it's the stuff that's going to happen. There's not really any point looking at it, in any comparison because it's committed to be built.
But it's not necessarily a little bit of building, it's a lot of bit of building. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's in flight.
Well, there is.
I mean, so
But if it's fully funded, then it's going to get built.
yeah, no, I know, but I just characterize that as just a little bit of building. It's a lot of building out there. I mean, we're all doing
But
a
it's,
significant
no
project,
build, because there's actually some being built.
a lot.
It's a nomenclature.
A lot. I mean, we got metro stations being built. We got roads all over the place, bus rapid transit systems being built. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that is funded over the next several years. So, yeah.
If I may, so yes, there is a lot of things happening around the region, but for NVDA we don't have information about everything that is happening in the region. We know about NVDA's funding, what NVDA funding is fully funded, projects that are funded through NVDA and fully funded. But it might be only part of the funding might be coming from NVDA, but we know that if there is an NVDA funding in a project, we know that if that is fully funded or not, with all the other sources too. So we know that much, but we don't really know all the other projects, all the jurisdictions are doing, whether they're all fully funded. So that there is a slight difference there when we say we consider projects that are fully funded. We don't know all the projects that you all are doing.
I got it. I'm just saying, when someone looks at this chart and says, well, no build, has this impact on BMT and PMT, like no build includes opening the Silver Line extension, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's, one of the largest rail extensions in this region in a generation. That's included in no build. And so I think it's important to note that when you look at these scenarios and you draw conclusions from the impact of no build, it includes a whole lot of things, a whole lot of roads being built across the region, a whole lot of transit being built across the region. And so it's important to differentiate them. So Mayor Risham.
So I have a question. So does the no build include only what the NVTA has approved and funded?
No.
In addition to the major projects like mega projects like Silver Line extension, I-66 South and the Beltway, those kind of projects, we know that that's in the region, those are all happening.
So it's only what the NVTA is aware of? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, you can say it that way. Correct.
Okay, I got it.
And we can certainly provide a list of all the projects that are being built now that we're aware of that are in the no build. We can provide that list.
You've got an asterisk saying no build includes these major projects
Yes.
and NVTA funded projects, or just something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I get that it would be very hard to even come up with the literal no build scenario. I mean, I don't even know how you would go about that, but I think it's important to just differentiate here for the purpose of.
Yes, no, that's a very good point. We'll certainly do that.
Okay. Other comments, questions, or other comments on the scenarios here? So I think we were going through and trying to clarify those or determining whether we needed to have a more lengthy presentation on the scenarios. Hearing nothing here.
Yeah, I guess one really quick question is on page 25, there are the potential benefits. Do those map back to the scenario analysis colors, right? Like it took me a while to figure out on page 25, like the beige one is standard forecast. You see the round thing?
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
It definitely goes back 2 pages. I think it maps back to the 2 pages before that. Is that
I
correct?
think the color coding matches, but I'm not sure. Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not sure we should infer.
And
anything.
that particular slide is more of a schematic. So yeah, we weren't trying to infer that the benefits were higher for the standard forecast there. So.
Okay, well, that's what it
Yeah.
looks like to me.
Sorry for the confusion. Yeah.
And that's exactly the kind of communication.
Okay, I'm like, well, obviously we should do the standard because it has the highest benefits and what's the, so,
Yeah, all right.
don't know what that is, but
Okay,
people like me.
that makes sense.
misinterpret. Okay,
You're right.
glad I asked.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked too. All right. Other questions on the scenarios? How they were put together? Okay. Are there other things you're looking for our reaction to?
No, this has been wonderful, and this is actually more feedback than I would hope for.
Hope for or expected?
This is Monica. I would say a little of both, to be honest.
Which one, wanted or expected or hopeful?
Expected.
All right, there we go. All right. Okay, so do we have anything else on transaction?
No, I think we've covered everything very much.
I'm hearing nothing. So we'll go to the NVTA update. Ms. Backman.
I don't have much, but thank you, Mr. Chair. I would note that we have an authority meeting on October 13th, and we are going to start talking about our 2023 legislative program. Several localities have reached out to us regarding the authority's priorities. And I would say, as last year, priority number 1 is to not impact or touch the regional revenue funds. And that's not only for authority, but that's for the other regional entities as well. I know oftentimes we're looked at as the big elephant in the room, and some feel we can do everything. We cannot. We know we have the outstanding balance of $38.5 million that we would like to get back to replace the $102 million that was diverted to WMANA in 2018. But I think right now protecting the dedicated revenues is at the top of the list. But we will have that discussion at the Governance and Personnel Committee meeting. And additionally, regarding your authority meeting, you will get an update on the concessionaire funded projects as part of Transform 66 outside of the Beltway. Susan Shaw from VDOT gives us a presentation every year. Now, as we approach the full opening, as you all know, the 9-mile segment between Prince William and Fairfax has opened. But as we approach the December full opening, we do want to get a status update of those concessionaire funded projects. And Mr. Chairman, that's all I have.
Any questions for Ms. Backman? All right, hearing none, we are adjourning. Now, what's I see a next meeting date of November 21st. That's Thanksgiving week, isn't it? Or is it next?
It is Thanksgiving week. Our regular meeting would have been the Monday after Thanksgiving.
That works for me. I don't know about others.
Works for me.
Is that the Monday of Thanksgiving?
It's the Monday of
Monday of
Are we
Thanksgiving.
talking about?
That's what we are talking about, 21st, which is the Monday of the
Before.
Thanksgiving.
Monday before thing.
Monday before Thanksgiving.
Yes. So that would be our next meeting. And is there any concerns on that?
So just to
Yep.
Monday the
let you know
21st,
that
right.
we're taking this feedback from all the committees and jurisdiction staff, everyone, and we are working through how to respond as Keith presented earlier, enhance the plan document itself and the project list. But then we will come back to you at this meeting, the November meeting, to endorse the plan or recommend the authority to endorse the plan. So that meeting is critical from our perspective that you all are here.
So can everyone make it?
I can.
I
The
might have
21st?
some difficulty on the 21st. My question is, what are the virtual attendance rules?
That is an option. If everyone wants to do that, that's possible because with our latest policy update, you all can meet twice in a year. That cannot be consecutive meeting, but if you are not meeting in October, then our meeting can be all virtual, or if one person want to join virtually, that is also fine.
Yeah,
If we have a physical quorum present.
Yeah, as long as we have.
I can be here. So I can definitely be here. Are there, okay,
So just to confirm the 21st.
21st, can you be here physically?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
perfect. All right, so then, yeah,
So we'll see.
we can be virtual if we.
If you're lucky, I'll be virtual. If you're unlucky, I'll be in person.
All right. Will you be in an exotic location?
No.
Oh, that's not fun. All right, do we have any